Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we've got another of our Commander's Guild deck techs. This is deck 225 and it's titled This Deck is Exhausting. So, if you haven't seen what we're doing on this channel, what we are doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com or from among suggested cards, working with a budget of $100 or less and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So today, our random card was suggested to us by Mort over on Discord, and that card is Loot the Pathfinder. And Loot is 2 green, blue, red for a 2/4 legendary creature beast noble. He's got double strike, vigilance, haste, and 3 separate exhaust abilities, which means we can only activate each of those abilities once per game. So the first exhaust ability is green, tap, add 3 mana of any one color. Second is blue, tap, draw 3 cards, and then red, tap, deal 3 damage to any target. Obviously, being able to only use each of these abilities once per game is very limiting, but they are all very powerful abilities, and it is also worth mentioning that if we cast Loot from, say, the command zone, because he is our commander for this week as well, then the loot that we cast will be a separate entity from any previous loots, and will therefore be able to activate its abilities again. So with that in mind, let's kind of piece together what we're doing with this deck and break down some of our themes for this week. Starting off, our first theme is going to be exhaust abilities. We want to build our entire deck around the fact that all of our cards can only activate their abilities once. And a good payoff for that is Ranger's Refueler, which is 1 and a blue for a 3/3 artifact vehicle. Whenever you activate an exhaust ability, draw a card, then it has exhaust for 4. This vehicle becomes an artifact creature, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it crews for 2. So notably, if we do activate its exhaust ability, it is permanently a 4/4 creature. It does not go back to being a vehicle. It no longer has to be crewed. But it also is a bit of a payoff for us activating all of our exhaust abilities. Being able to draw cards is a great way to keep refilling our hand and put us in a position where we can keep playing things, maybe hold up some mana to activate abilities, and hopefully outvalue the rest of the table. Moving on to our second theme of the deck, this one is reducing costs of abilities. So how that works is with cards like Training Grounds, which is 1 blue mana for an enchantment. Activated abilities of creatures you control cost 2 less to activate. This effect can't reduce the mana in that cost to less than 1 mana. Since a lot of exhaust abilities are very expensive, it only makes sense that we really want to get them cheaper so we can activate multiple exhaust abilities in a turn. So if we have Training Grounds, then Ranger's Refueler only costs 2 mana to exhaust it rather than 4, which is a huge boost in power, meaning that we can effectively activate more exhaust abilities, we can draw more cards, we can do more damage, and we can just snowball out of control. Moving on to our final theme of the deck, this one is copying our abilities. Because exhaust can only be done once per game, if we can copy those abilities, we can get a lot more value out of them, especially because they're typically costed in a way that activating them once per game is kind of the limitation, because they may just be super strong. So doubling up on them means we get 2 of a very powerful ability. So a good example of how we can do that is with Adric Mathematical Genius, which is 1 and a blue for a 1/1 legendary creature human artificer. You can pay 2 and a blue, tap it, and copy target activated or triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. That is the main focus of why we want this card, but it does have some other upside as well. He also has Ultimate Sacrifice for 1 and a blue, sacrifice Adric and counter target activated or triggered ability, and he has Doctor's Companion, which admittedly is not relevant for this deck, but it's there in case you want him in the command zone. Either way though, copying all of our activated and triggered abilities is a great way to really just outvalue the table, do what we want to do, and put ourselves in a position where we're a little untouchable by our opponents. That, though, are all of our themes for this week. So moving on to the next piece of our deck tech, we're going to talk a little bit about some key cards. And these are cards that really synergize with what we're trying to do, and in a lot of cases are win conditions, value engines, or just kind of like the MVPs of the deck. So starting off, our first key card is going to be Experiment Kraj. And Experiment Kraj is 2 green, blue for a 4/6 legendary creature ooze mutant. Experiment Kraj has all activated abilities of each other creature with a +1/+1 counter on it, and it can tap to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So the way that this functions is we can put a counter on something, say loot for example, and then Experiment Kraj now gains all of the exhaust abilities of that creature. So being able to activate exhaust on loot and then also that same exhaust ability on Experiment Kraj is incredibly powerful because it again allows us to double up on those abilities. It lets us keep going and keep getting more value and cards and damage and counters and everything else that we need to execute our game plan. And Experiment Kraj is still going to be a pretty big creature in the end. A 4/6 is a great body to block with, and being able to defend while also activating abilities is very relevant. Moving on though to our second key card of the deck, this one is going to be Elvish Refueler. An Elvish Refueler, 2 and a green for a 2/3 creature, elf druid. During your turn, as long as you haven't activated an exhaust ability this turn, you may activate exhaust abilities as though they haven't been activated, and it has exhaust itself, 1 and a green, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Being able to activate any exhaust ability twice, as we mentioned earlier with our copy effects, is very powerful, and while she doesn't let us just continuously use our exhaust abilities, we can only do it on our turn, we can only do it once per turn, it's still very powerful because that means that we can activate loot, for example, and then untap and activate loot again. Basically draw 6 cards or make 3 mana twice or do 6 damage, and it's very powerful to be able to reuse some of these effects. And worst case scenario, we can just keep putting counters on the Elvish Refueler if we have nothing else that we need to activate at that moment. But it is worth mentioning that this has to be on your turn, because I've definitely made the mistake of passing and expecting to exhaust something that's already been exhausted, so try not to make that mistake. Moving on to our final key card, this one is Agatha's Soul Cauldron. And Agatha's Soul Cauldron is unfortunately a massive $32 thanks to its seeing play in standard at the moment, but I do think it is worth it if you can squeeze it in. It is 2 mana for a legendary artifact. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to activate abilities of creatures you control. Then, creatures you control, with +1/+1 counters on them, have all activated abilities of all creature cards exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, and you can tap her to exile target card from a graveyard. When a creature card is exiled this way, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. There are a lot of exhaust abilities that just naturally give a creature a +1/+1 counter, so being able to exhaust, put a counter on that creature, and then give that creature the exhaust ability of every single card exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron means we can constantly reuse things like Elvish Refueler, we can constantly reuse anything like the Refueler that is able to turn itself into a creature and put a +1/+1 counter on it. All of our things are going to be triggering themselves, so being able to continuously activate those abilities is incredibly powerful and probably just wins games. That, though, is the end of our key cards section for today. So the next thing we're going to do is take a look at some cool interactions in the deck. And these are cards that really synergize well with what the deck is trying to do, but they're also just kind of some fun cards that I want to highlight. So first up, we have Agatha of the Vile Cauldron and Sita Varma Masked Racer. Agatha is a green and a red for a 1/1 legendary creature, human warlock. Activated abilities of creatures you control cost X less to activate, where X is Agatha's power. This effect can't reduce the mana in that cost to less than 1. So that automatically makes everything cost 1 less. Then she also has her own activated ability, which does get reduced by her own other ability. It is 4 red-green. Other creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample and haste until the end of turn. This is on its own one of the best cost reducers in the entire deck, because if we can get Agatha to, say, 5 power, she then reduces all of our activated abilities by 5. And while it can't reduce the mana in that cost to less than 1, it's still very powerful with abilities that have an X in their cost, like Sita Varma, who is a green and a blue for a 2/3 legendary creature human rogue. She has exhaust. For X green green blue, put X +1/+1 counters on Sita Varma. Then you may have the base power and toughness of each other creature you control become equal to Sita Varma's power until the end of turn. So if we load Agatha up with +1/+1 counters and are able to get her up to 5 power, she would make Sita Varma's ability cost 5 less, meaning all we have to spend is green, green, blue, and X is already equal to 5. Then any additional mana we dump in is just going to be extra, plus then it's going to make Agatha even stronger because every other creature is going to get power equal to Sita Varma's, so ideally Agatha gets even bigger, and then Agatha's ability can cost less to give stuff trample, haste, and another +1/+1, and they really just both snowball with each other, probably winning us the game the turn that we can activate Sita Varma's exhaust ability. Moving on to our second cool interaction, though. This one is going to be between Illusionist's Bracers and Marvin Murderous Mimic. So Illusionist Bracers, 2 mana for an artifact equipment. Whenever an ability of equipped creature is activated, if it isn't a mana ability, copy that ability. You may choose new targets for the copy, and it equips for 3. So an automatic copy effect is very powerful, and it's very powerful if we put it on Marvin, which is 2 mana for a 2/2 legendary artifact creature toy. Marvin has all activated abilities of creatures you control that don't have the same name as this creature. So essentially, if Marvin is in play, it has all of the exhaust abilities of every single other creature we control, meaning every time we activate Marvin, we can activate whatever exhaust ability we want and copy it with Illusionist Bracers. So Marvin is already a very powerful card, but being able to double up on his abilities makes him even stronger and probably just wins the game. Anyway, though, those are all of our cool interactions for today. So the next thing we're going to do is take a look at the price of the deck. And today, the total deck price came in at $87.62, with the most expensive card in the deck being Quicksilver Elemental at a massive $39.02. Now, unfortunately, when I put this deck together, Quicksilver Elemental was much cheaper than this, and a recent printing of Vivi in the Final Fantasy set has spiked this card up because it does create an infinite combo where you can make infinite mana with Vivi and Quicksilver Elemental. So unfortunately, it has raised the price of the deck a little bit. It should still be under budget, but I did want to make that apparent before continuing. So with that being said, Quicksilver Elemental is 3 blue for a 3/4 elemental. You can pay a blue, and it gains all activated abilities of target creature until the end of turn, and you may spend blue mana, as though it were mana of any color, to pay the activation costs of Quicksilver Elemental's abilities. So the reason that this is so important to the deck, and the reason it spiked up when Vivi was printed, is because you can activate this multiple times in a turn to gain the abilities of a creature multiple times, meaning that if you are targeting, say, Loot, for example, with the Quicksilver Elemental, you gain all 3 of his exhaust abilities. But if you activate it a second time, you gain a second version of all of those exhaust abilities, meaning that you can then activate the same one twice because you have 2 different versions of that ability on Quicksilver Elemental. So it's a very powerful card. It definitely does a lot of crazy things in this deck. But if you need to trim on price, this is a very easy card to cut, especially if you're trying to avoid infinite combos, because this can very easily turn into an infinite combo. Now, with that being said, if you're looking to increase the price of the deck, I have a suggestion for you there as well, and it's actually a card we've already talked about. It is VV Ornithir, which, as much as I didn't want to suggest this, considering it is a $45 card, it is absolutely perfect for this deck. VV is 1 blue-red for a 0/3 legendary creature wizard. You can pay 0 mana to add X mana in any combination of blue and or red where X is VV's power, activate only during your turn, and only once each turn. Then, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on VV and it deals 1 damage to each opponent. This is the kind of card that is great to stick under Agatha's Soul Cauldron. It's great to copy with the Quicksilver Elemental. It's great to copy with some of our copy effects like the Illusionist Bracers. So VV really does everything we want to be doing in this deck. So it is very unfortunate that VV is $45. But if you happen to pull one in your Final Fantasy products, or if you just happen to already have one, then hey, it's definitely worth the inclusion. That being said, though, if you're putting a card into the deck, obviously you'd have to take a card out of the deck. So the card I would recommend taking out this week is Essence Flux, which is 1 blue mana for an instant, exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If it's a spirit, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Now, originally, when I put this in the deck, I was thinking that we could blink loot so that way we could activate his abilities multiple times. But in practice, being able to exile one thing for one card is not really what we want to be doing. It's not terrible because you can still activate Loot's ability to draw cards and make mana, but if we're talking about pure value, then obviously I think VV is going to give you a lot more over the course of a game than Essence Flux will. That's not to say it's a bad card, I just think VV is a little bit of an upgrade. With that being said, though, that brings us to the end of our deck tech for today. And before we get into a game, I do want to shout out our current patrons and channel members and say thank you so much to everybody for watching up to this point. You may know that I recently set myself a goal to hit 2,000 subscribers by the end of June, and we actually did it. We hit the 2,000 mark literally on the last day of June, which absolutely blows my mind. So thank you all so much for all of your support. I genuinely really appreciate it. And if you haven't already, I would love it if you would like this video and subscribe to the channel, because hopefully we're just going to continue to grow. Otherwise, though, if you haven't already, I also recently launched a second channel where my wife Lena and I have been playing through some video games and just kind of having a good time. So if that's something you might be interested in checking out, I would love it if you would. It's called the Dungeon Learners Game, because obviously we got to keep the same acronym. Right now we're playing through Date Everything. There's actually going to be a new video going up today. We're playing through Oblivion Remastered, and I've done a couple of runs of Dead Cells on there as well. So if you're interested in any of those things, or if you have suggestions for games you would like to see, please let me know and I will do my best to get to those. But with all the shoutouts and everything else out of the way, let's talk about the game that we are going to put loot through and try to exhaust our opponents. So our opponents for today, we have 3 of them. We have Doodle playing Kazarov Sengir Pureblood with his companion, Obosh the Prey Piercer. We have Jason playing Felithar Dawn of the Abzan, and we have Bilal playing Giada Font of Hope. So starting off with Doodle and his Kazarov deck, this is kind of just what you expect a Kazarov deck to be. It wants to burn out his opponent's creatures, wants to put a ton of +1/+1 counters on Kazarov, and then use Kazarov to win the game. Plus, it also has Obosh in the companion zone to be able to double up on the effects, but that does mean that Doodle can only play odd-costed spells, so 1, 3, 5, 7, and so on. So I'm very interested to see what he's able to pull together with a restriction like that. Moving on to our second opponent, Jason. And his Felithar deck has shown up on the channel before. It didn't quite get the chance to do everything it wanted to, but I know that Jason has a bit of a specialty when it comes to +1/+1 counters and aristocrats, so I think this deck is perfect for him and his playstyle, so I'm definitely very terrified to see what he can do. And last but not least, we have Bilal playing Giada, Font of Hope. And honestly, I think this is our biggest threat at the table today. I think that angels with their life gain is going to make it very difficult for us to outvalue them, because while we may be able to do a little bit of damage, I don't think we can keep up with the damage output and the life gain output that angels are able to produce. So that is definitely a big concern for me. Otherwise, I would love to hear what everyone else thinks, so if you have any predictions or any thoughts about how you think this game is going to go, please do put them down in the comments. I always love seeing what people think is going to happen in the games. But other than that, let's jump into this one, and I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, Doodle goes first, followed by Jason, myself, and then Bilal. On Doodle's first turn, he plays a Canyon Slough. Jason plays a Temple of Plenty, scrying 1. I play an island and cast Mind Spring Merfolk. Bilal plays a Plains. Doodle plays a Stenzia Bloodhall. Jason plays a Swamp and casts an Orzhov Signet. I play an Is It Boilerworks, returning an island to my hand, and then I attack Bilal for 1. Bilal plays a Plains and casts his commander, Giada, Font of Hope, now letting his angels enter with +1/+1 counters equal to the number of other angels he controls. Doodle plays a Swamp and casts Basalt Monolith, which taps for 3 and can untap itself for 3. This also lets him cast a Burnished Heart. Jason cast a Kodama's Reach, searching his library for 2 basic lands, putting 1 into play tapped and the other into his hand. Once that resolves, he plays a Golgari Rot Farm and returns a Plains to his hand. I play a Cinderglade and attack Jason for 1. Then, in my second main phase, I cast Pit Automaton, which can tap for 2 colorless mana, but only to activate abilities, and it can also tap to copy the next Exhaust ability that I would activate this turn. Bilal plays a Plains and attacks me for 2 with Giada. Then, in his second main phase, he cast Archangel of Tithes, entering with a +1/+1 counter, and making his opponents pay 1 to attack him if it's untapped, or pay 1 to block his creatures if it's tapped. On Doodle's turn, he simply untaps and passes. Jason cast an Abzan Falconer, giving all his creatures with +1/+1 counters flying, and he also cast Conclave Mentor, putting an additional +1/+1 counter on his creatures when they would have any +1/+1 counters placed on them. Finally, he plays a Selesnya Sanctuary and returns a Swamp to his hand. I play an island, and at this point, to save some time, Doodle sacrifices Burnished Heart to search his library for 2 basic lands, putting them into play tapped. After that, I cast Cultivate, searching my library for 2 basic lands, putting 1 into play tapped and the other into my hand. Bilal cast Mindstone and Sword of the Animist before moving to combat and attacking me for 2 with Giada. Doodle casts an Honored Heirloom. Jason cast Kami of Whispered Hopes, which can tap for mana equal to the number of +1/+1 counters on it, and also puts another +1/+1 counter on his creatures when he would place any +1/+1 counters on them. Then he outlasts his Abzan Falconer, tapping it to put 3 +1/+1 counters on it, and casts Cultivate, searching his library for 2 basic lands, putting 1 into play tapped and the other into his hand. Then he plays a Swamp and passes. I play a Mountain and cast my commander, Loot the Pathfinder, and immediately attack Jason with him for 4 since he has haste. Bilal plays an Arch of Orazka and equips Giada with Sword of the Animist, giving her +1/+1 and letting Bilal search his library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped whenever she attacks. In response, Doodle pays 3 mana to untap Basalt Monolith, then Bilal is able to attack Doodle for 3 with Giada, searching his library for a basic land and putting it into play tapped. On Doodle's turn, he casts his commander, Kazarov Sengir Pureblood, which gets a +1/+1 counter whenever an opponent's creature is dealt damage. Once that resolves, he casts Tremor, doing 1 damage to each creature without flying. This kills Jason's Kami and deals a total of 6 damage to creatures, so Kazarov gets 6 +1/+1 counters. Notably, this would also kill my merfolk, so in response, I activate Loot to add 3 blue mana, using that and the 2 mana from Pit Automaton to activate the merfolk for X equals 3, drawing 3 cards and putting a +1/+1 counter on it. Jason plays a forest and casts Ivory Tusk Fortress, untapping all his creatures with +1/+1 counters on them in each player's untapped step. Once that resolves, Jason also casts his commander Felothar Dawn of the Abzan, sacrificing a non-land permanent when she enters or attacks to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature he controls. With this trigger, he sacrifices Orzhov's Signet to put 2 counters on each creature he controls. Since they now all have flying, this allows him to attack me for 4 and attack Bilal for 7, paying 1 for the Archangel of Tithes. On my turn, I play an island and cast Ranger's Refueler, now drawing a card whenever I activate an exhaust ability. After that, I cast Kodama's Reach, searching my library for 2 basic lands, putting 1 into play tapped and the other into my hand. Bilal cast Valkyrie Harbinger, entering with 2 +1/+1 counters and now letting him make a 4/4 Angel token in each end step if he gained 4 or more life that turn. Then he attacks me for 3 with Giada, searching his library for a basic land and putting it into play tapped. On Doodle's turn, he casts Strike It Rich, making a treasure token, then casts Unstable Obelisk, followed up by casting Fire Ants. Jason plays a Canopy Vista and attacks Doodle with his entire board for 23 total damage, but Doodle blocks the Falconer with Kazarov. Before damage, Jason casts Ready and Willing, giving all his creatures indestructible, lifelink, death touch, and untapping them. This ends up killing Kazarov while Doodle takes 16 and Jason gains 23. At the end of turn, I activate the exhaust ability of the Refueler, permanently turning it into a 3/3 creature, putting a +1/+1 counter on it, and drawing a card. On my turn, I play a forest and cast Ghostly Flicker, exiling Loot and a forest and returning them to play. In response, I also hold priority to cast Dualcaster Mage, copying the Ghostly Flicker while it's on the stack. The new copy targets the Dualcaster Mage and Loot, allowing me to exile them and return them to play all before the original Ghostly Flicker has resolved, meaning the Dualcaster Mage can copy it again, giving me infinite copies. This allows me to activate Loot's exhaust abilities in between each copy since he's considered a new entity, using him to generate infinite mana and eventually do infinite damage to each of my opponents, knocking them all out and winning me the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. Definitely a very quick game. We only went about 7 turns. I didn't expect to win in the way that we won. Obviously, I put the infinite combo in my deck for a reason. Being able to win with Ghostly Flicker and Dualcaster Mage is a pretty common combo that I put in a lot of my decks because I'm a big supporter of decks having infinite combos. And you may have noticed we didn't tutor for that combo at all, we just kind of drew it naturally, which I think is perfectly fine for a lot of decks, and I think that having Loot in the command zone makes that combo just absolutely backbreaking for the rest of the table because it is quite literally an auto win button, being able to make infinite mana, draw infinite cards, do infinite damage, so very, very powerful. But even without the infinite combo, I think the deck actually felt very solid. I think Exhaust as a mechanic was a little underrated. I think that they're very well costed for the ability, especially because you can only use them once per game. So being able to activate it and then possibly blink it or recast that creature or even just using it once, I think overall it did very well and I'm very happy with how this deck turned out. Going around the table though, let's talk a little bit about all of our opponents. Bilal unfortunately didn't quite get off the ground, didn't do too much. That's a little bit of the downside of playing Angels, is they tend to be a little bit bigger. You kind of have to try to survive until the late game, which is where the lifelink comes in. So a little unfortunate we didn't see too much of Giada, but I think Giada is a very powerful card if she's allowed to get rolling. We just didn't quite see it today. Doodle's deck also did very well. I think the ability to ramp super quickly into Kazarov was very impressive, and being able to play Kazarov and immediately cast a Tremor afterwards to just have a 10/10 flying commander, very powerful, very cool, definitely a big fan of Kazarov, and hopefully we'll get to see that deck again in the future. And then, last but not least, of course, Jason and his Felithar deck. He got a little bit frustrated because he was flooding out pretty poorly, but I think that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It meant that he could cast all of his spells. He still had a huge board presence. He had a ton of creatures that were flying, and he did a bunch of damage on a single turn with the Ready and Willing. So I think that was Jason's game to win, and if we hadn't pulled off the infinite combo, there's no doubt in my mind that Jason probably would have started to run away with the game. So hopefully we'll get to see Felithar again in the future, and he'll be able to get a little bit back with his Felithar deck. That, though, is the end of our video for today, so thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the deck tech and the gameplay. If you have any suggestions for future videos or future cards you'd like to see me build around, please do let me know. But I hope you all enjoyed it. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would like and subscribe to the channel. But I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.